Today is the 3rd of March, 2023. So I was thinking today, I was thinking about all the dogs that I owned in the past since I was a child. I've had a lot of dogs. I'm down to the very last one. I don't plan on replacing her once she's gone. At this point, the dogs are going to outlive me. That's just kind of how I look at it. But then I started to think about all of them that I had, and all of them were spayed and neutered, except for this last one that I have, right? And then I started to have this kind of epiphany about them being neutered and so on and so forth. So I started looking up some information on how old they should be when you spay and neuter them, right? So in case you don't know, when you neuter a male dog, you take off his testicles. You just remove them. When you spay a female, they remove their ovaries, they remove their uterus. So there's nothing left. Back in the day, you did this when the dogs reached sexual maturity, which was about a year. You waited till they were about a year old. And they've actually been doing studies on this. So now they don't do this anymore. If you go to a shelter and you get a shelter dog, they cut their gonads out while they are still puppies. They do not wait for them to reach sexual maturity. So they take everything out while they're young, while they're still immature, while they're still growing, before they have physically matured. And you can see the studies they've been doing on this, and there are vets that don't want to do this to younger dogs. And it'll probably work with cats too. And what they've discovered is that if you do not let these animals sexually mature, so they get their growth hormones and their testosterone and estrogen, their bones don't set right, they don't mature fully physically. They don't mature right, and they end up with long-term health problems because of it. So then I started to think, all the dogs that I had that got neutered or spayed, I always waited till after they sexually matured. And I realized I'm thinking about the males. And once they had their nuts cut off, they were still lifting their legs. Even though they didn't have their balls anymore, they still lift their legs on a tree, and, they still peed like males. Then I think of the one or two dogs I had that got neutered when they were young, before they reached sexual maturity, before I got them. They always peed like females. So the male dogs are peeing like females, right? And then I started to think about this to apply it to human beings. So we all know what's going on in our culture now with this movement about who's male, who's female, how I feel, or whatever. So now what you have a medical establishment, human medicine, that is seeking to alter the body chemistry of men and women while they are children. Puberty blockers and such. Mastectomies and stuff. Turning young men into eunuchs. Let's call this what it is, for what it is. You are more or less spaying and neutering. You are spaying and neutering human beings at a young age. Now, there isn't much fundamental difference in a sense between a dog and a human being when it comes to hormones. Hormones are, I'll give you an example of this. Insulin, before there was synthetic insulin, you would either use horse insulin or pig insulin. Maybe they still use it instead of synthetic stuff, but hormones transcend species barriers. So it doesn't matter where you get it from, it's still there, right? Well, if you're removing gonads off of a dog or cats at a young age, and it affects their development physically, like I said, they're fully sexually mature, usually around a year old, maybe a little older, 8 months to, let's say, 8 to 14 months with dogs and cats, right? Versus human beings, it takes us, at the very least, a decade to start reaching reproductive age. So let's say you're a young man that they determine at 3 years old that you need a gender affirming care, which actually means we're going to make you a eunuch. We're going to neuter you. We're going to take those things off, and we're going to use surgical reconstruction and manufacture a fake coochie. Now, as far as women, they can't really do that too well because the appendage is not. You can only make a penis so big out of a clitoris. It's just the way it is. I don't care how many hormones you might make it a little better, but you're not going to make a full-fledged phallus out of that. It's just not going to happen. And you can pretend this. If look up the surgeries, just go online and look them up. You can go on YouTube and look them up. They'll do like animation surgical procedure you can watch when they do this gender reassignment stuff. If you have kids and you want to put them through that kind of nightmare, there's something wrong with you. Especially if they're kids. If you're 18 and you want to make yourself a eunuch, have at it, dude. Go full out, man. Go full out. Get yourself some Phaco biddies and just have at it. And live with the consequences. That's kind of how I weigh. You're 18 years old. You're a big boy. You're a big girl. Go do big girl, big boy stuff. And enjoy it. Enjoy that lifelong alteration. And why am I making this? Because I'm just thinking about the dogs that I had. And how much I loved them. And I wanted what was best for them. And the ones that I had, I did not get them. I didn't get their gonads removed until the proper time, until they were a specific age, so they wouldn't have any ill effects. Go online and look this stuff up now. There are vets recognizing that they're too young. I'll even go a step further. I used to have ferrets, and now when you buy ferrets, you go to a PetSmart or whatever, you buy ferrets. They're 6 weeks old. They already removed that stuff. They already removed that from these. Now, these are animals that ferrets only live about 7 or 8 years at the most, right? So you're removing their gonads long before they even reach their maturity level. So how's that going to shorten their lives? Because it's going to have an effect. You don't remove those things and not have an effect. And we have well-documented studies of human beings having their gonads removed at various times of their lives. Women in their 40s and their 50s, it's not unusual for them to have full hysterectomies. What is that in animal terms? Well, you're getting spayed. Okay? Sometimes they'll remove the uterus and leave an ovary or two in, but sometimes it's a full hysterectomy. They remove everything. Does that have an effect on a woman at a particular age? Not so much. But let's do that to a woman at 16. Let's do that to one at 8 years old. See what that happens. It's well documented, and particularly if you do this with men. It's been well documented over the centuries when you remove the gonads off of young men and how they develop. Look it up. Man, I remember back in college, I can remember the sexual characteristics and the physical characteristics of a male where they had that removed at a certain age. Why do we know this? Because throughout history, part of in wartime, when we grabbed young men, a lot of times in certain parts of the world, you made eunuchs out of them, and they never developed fully. They never developed properly when they were young. But if you took someone like me and you took the gonads off, the equipment will still work. That's one thing they didn't realize. When they put eunuchs in charge of a harem, if the men were a certain age, they could still get it up and they could still have relations. You're just shooting blanks. And they just thought, well, because you had that removed. But that's not true. At a certain age, it won't matter. I feel it was important to make this because am I comparing dogs and human beings? Yes. Should I be doing that? Yes. Why? Oh, because every drug that you take, every medical thing that you use or do or procedure, it was always performed on beagles before it made it to human beings. They use dogs in a lot of these studies, particularly beagles. They tested so much stuff on beagles. So am I making a jump? No, I'm not. Because like I said, the testicles and ovaries in dogs pretty much work the same way they work in a human being, on a mammal. Okay, so whether you like that or not, I'm sorry, that's just the scientific way it works. There's some things that all mammals pretty much have in common, and that's one of them. Pretty much so. So if we just look at the studies with neutering and spaying dogs at a young age and see how that affects their development, and you don't think that doesn't have ramifications as human beings, you are sadly mistaken. And human beings are being misled by a medical establishment that's in bed with a new world order, which is in bed with our particular government. Whatever's going on in Western nations now, the nonsense that you see. There's another thing. Take a look and see how many gender-affirming care centers were, gender reassignment surgical centers there were 10 or 15 years ago as compared to now. That is a big moneymaker, because once you do this to a human being, they will spend their entire life going to the doctor, having nothing but problems. It's important. I think every rational, reasonable adult should look at this stuff. But we're living in a time, in an age now, where the morons among us say believe the science, but they only believe the science when it's convenient for them. Remember that. Till next time.